So you've built a property portfolio of 17 million. How did you do it?
In terms of the whole journey to 17 million, if I was to firstly bullet point it into 3 areas.
For someone with a limited budget, what's your advice for them to get into property investing?
So I think right now it's fair to say that the majority will be limited budgets. Interest rates are not pretty, the economy's not strengthening by any means. And so I think the key here is that I'm a big believer of reverse engineering your success. And when you reverse engineer, your picture is going to be very pretty or it's going to be horrible. And horrible examples could be not enough cash, not enough borrowing capacity, not enough this. When you reverse engineer it though, you're at least going to know the sequence of moves that it takes. And then from there you can start to the next phase, which is go, what are my gaps? Property is not a cash flow vehicle for me anymore. It's a wealth storage. It's a leveraged area that I can have equity to lean on if needed. And it's a vehicle that gives me confidence my future generations are set. My business is my cash flow vehicle. My business is at a stage where I've got about 40 team members. And as a result, the team is able to leverage, meaning we work together so they can be the leverage to take the results of the business, our clients themselves to new heights. Yep. That's the leverage.
Did you get that, guys? The information provided in this podcast is for general purposes only and should not be considered personal advice. Always consult with qualified professionals or experts in the relevant field for personalized advice tailored to your specific situation. Welcome to another episode of Catching Up with Property. In this episode, we talk to InvestorKit's founder, Arjun Paliwal. InvestorKit won Buyer's Agency of the Year 2 times in a row, back to back, 2023 and 2024. They've got over 570 5-star Google reviews. Arjun is often a guest in news and media programs such as Channel 7's Sunrise, News.com, and Australian Financial Review. Lean into this episode as we uncover how Arjun built his own $17 million property portfolio and how you can get onto the property ladder too. Thanks, Arjun, for joining us here on this episode of Catching Up with Property. So you've built a property portfolio of 17 million. How did you do it?
Yeah, it's a good question and one that's easier said than done. But firstly, it's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me. And I think the name of the show as well is pretty cool. So well done there as well.
Thank you.
In terms of the whole journey to 17 million, if I was to firstly bullet point it into 3 areas, it's not overnight. It's about 9 years now of investing. Yeah, 10 years actually. So it's been 10 years. That's time, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. And in those 10 years, that's just when I bought the first property. Before those 10 years, there's another 2 or 3 years of savings, things like that, and growing.
Building foundation work.
Yeah, anyone who's telling you they do this overnight, they've won the lotto or they're extremely rich already in other ways, right? So it's a long-term journey. That's the first part. The second part I would say is that there are very few people who have built a larger portfolio without the same ambitions to grow a portfolio being applied across their career, their personal growth, their mindset. So to actually grow one, I'm not going to sit here and tell people you can do that on the average income. You can't. You can't be average. If you don't want to be average in results, you can't be average in how you are, in terms of how your mindset is, the decisions you take, the risks you take, the career you grow, the business you grow. Are you doing this on your own or doing this with another significant, partner or significant other? So that's the second part. And then the third and final part I'd say is your asset selection, your market selection, the research that goes into performing it. Because if you buy a couple of duds, they'll stop you from getting to that larger number.
Yep.
But if you buy a few good ones, you start to compound and it rolls on. So that's my simplified version. Time, growth personally and financially and professionally. And then lastly, to be able to actually make better decisions across that buying journey.
Yeah, thank you. I really love how you're being raw about it. Building a $17 million portfolio is not something you build overnight. And it also takes a lot of passion. But also one thing you specifically said was it does require income. It does require you to work on your income potential or your earning potential to build that portfolio. It's not like you can do that on an average salary, say.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest point I want to call out, right? Because too many people shy away from that and they focus on just the portfolio and they don't talk about who you need to be as a person to get that portfolio. Because I find even after helping over 750 families grow their wealth and purchase over 1,400 properties, I'm yet to see any family member in that group of people or any person actually achieve a large result because they hated what they did and they're trying to get out of the rat race, because they didn't want to be in their career anymore, because they thought that there's no way to earn more money, grow more as a person, and they want property to be this income vehicle. Everyone who focuses on using another asset to get out of something because they hate it usually cuts corners, isn't patient, or is not willing to invest in themselves because they see I want to get out of what I'm doing. And so that's a big tip for anyone, is that if you're looking to get a portfolio to be okay in retirement, you can do that if you hate what you do. Don't stress about that. But if you're looking for something that's monumental to truly generational wealth build, to change your life, to achieve a high income that you want to live a better life in that future, it's not going to be happening from you hating what you do.
So on the flip side, it would have to be something you love.
Look, it's a combination. I don't want to be too fluffy and say you love it and that's good enough, because I love playing video games, but am I the best at video games in the world? No. 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds kick my ass all the time. So I get humbled on Call of Duty. I get humbled on NBA 2K. And sometimes I go into the gym and pre some health stuff that came up, I'd be training. And when I was training, I'd get humbled by a 15-year-old kid in Thailand beating the crap out of me in Muay Thai, right? So the main thing is I love those things.
Yeah.
You have to be good at it too.
Yeah.
And that good can come from the passion turning to skill.
Yeah.
Or that good can come from you having a gifted ability and you realizing that I'm going to learn to love that.
Yeah.
And it's surprising how many people try and separate skill and passion. You need both to actually truly get to somewhere.
I love that. Were there any specific milestones in your building of that $17 million portfolio?
Yeah, I think there's milestones that are both good and bad. So the first part is my first few investment properties. I'd used a professional to help me with them. And this was a big spark for actually what we do today at InvestorKit. It's that we run a data-driven buyers agency. And the whole data-driven concept came from me realizing I'd purchased properties without data to begin with.
You were just stabbing in the dark.
Yeah, I guess the professional that passed me these properties, there was a few common themes I noticed. And unfortunately, these common themes exist everywhere today. Number one, buying a cheap property just because it's cheap. Number two, buying a property that has a high rental yield and thinking that's going to equal a great outcome for your portfolio. And then number three is buying somewhere that hasn't grown and thinking not growth always equals growth. You know, sometimes it can not grow for another 6 years. And so my example was that I'd purchased a Brisbane townhouse in 2016 and a Brisbane dual occupancy in 2016. And these two properties were purchased and they were following that sequence. Oh, look, it's cheap. You're a Sydney-sider, so this is cheap to you. Oh, look, you're a Sydney-sider. This is great rents to you. Look, you're a Sydney-sider. It hasn't grown here. What if it turns around? Now, did they eventually grow? Yeah, but I'm talking 7 or 8 years afterwards.
Yeah. So
did they grow back then?
No.
They didn't for 6 years. So that was the learnings and that got me to data-driven. But I think milestones can also be looked at as mistakes that were pivotal to making good decisions afterwards.
Yeah, right. Downloading.
No, all good. If I was to share some other milestones that were important as well in the journey, firstly, when I'd realized the power of diversity. You know, I'd started investing in 2015, and from 2015 to today, I'd realized that the diversity piece has been a key part of my journey.
So when you're saying diversity, are you talking about asset type like resi, commercial, or are you talking about location?
I'm talking both, right? So resi commercial was one aspect, but location even more so. Sometimes people feel like you have to diversify completely out of property investing. You don't, right? Property investing, you can be diverse within it.
Yeah.
House unit, townhouse, commercial, large prices, major markets, smaller markets, cities, regionals, New South Wales, Victoria, the list goes on. So that was a big difference maker for me because people think, and it's mainly from recency bias, that between 2021 onwards, everything grows everywhere at the same time. Because we're in a national property boom, right? So it felt that way. But you have to go back to those who've invested prior COVID.
Yeah.
And for my case, in 2015 to 17, my Sydney property killed it. Then from 17 to 19, it did very little.
Yeah,
then from
it plateaued.
Absolutely, right? Then 17 to 20, my Tassie properties killed it more than anything else.
Yeah, right.
But then 20 to 2022 and 3, my Brisbane and Adelaide ones did well. So the key here is that if I didn't have that diversity, I relied on comfort, the backyard, what's close to home, I wouldn't have been able to purchase as many. I wouldn't have been able to grow it. And I wouldn't have been able to have equity to leverage every single year. Because every single year since 2015, I've had equity somewhere to leverage.
Yeah.
Simply because of their diversity.
Yeah. And you were purchasing in areas before the curve, right?
Yeah, that was a core part of them.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing is even if, say, someone doesn't nail the purchase timings, just by having diversity, something's going to be hot, something's going to be flat, something's going to be very quiet, and maybe even go backwards. But every year you'll have something doing different in your portfolio.
So you'll be able to tap on one of them.
Absolutely. And you know it from the finance space, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're able to see someone's portfolio holistically and they feel like some haven't done well, but you go, hold on a minute, I can take equity from here.
Correct.
It's powerful, right? So yeah.
As you're building a large portfolio, is there a time where you have to sell down in order to keep going or to take that next step of growth?
It's a really good question. So it depends, right? I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why. There were some assets I sold because it blocked me from having the borrowing capacity to make other moves. It blocked me also knowing that I had more knowledge now and I had the data to be able to make better decisions. So those other moves were clear.
Yeah.
And so I needed to make that sell. And also I imagined what my portfolio would look like long term.
Yeah.
And could I imagine those in there? And so when I looked at it that way, some sales came up on the journey. However, if you feel like now with the knowledge I have beyond that, if you feel your income trajectory, your growth, your professional development, your patience, your time in your journey of investing, you can start to map these things out and create almost a business plan for your own life. You start getting into a position where you go, well, I can hold on to that. Even if the bank's not saying yes to me right now, I envision with where I'm trending, where my forecasts are, where my goal is, where interest rates might be, where lending may go, it'll eventually come up and I'd like to hold that through the cycle. So I think the key there is that I would say if you can build a holistic business plan of your life and you know where you're going to go, some assets might come around with some time. And you don't have to worry about the opportunity cost and know that it'll play a part in your portfolio. But if you ask yourself, is this going to play a part long term? Is this blocking me from moves? And do I have the knowledge and capability to make better moves? Then that's a question to raise. So
it's almost like you can build your own financial plan for yourself, especially for your own property game. But the sell down is really, if it's going to help you get into the next growth, right?
And I think that's like one element to get into that. But I would say the biggest periods of sell down come after what I call the second and third decade. So in property investing, very rare do people actually hit their end goals before 2 decades. Now, people often say, oh, let me do this in 10 years. Let me do this in 15 years. But if you actually do compound growth mapping, factor inflation, factor debt that you have, factor all of these things, you'll come to realize that it's a 20-year game. And in that 20-year game, you've got 3 distinct phases: acquiring assets, holding assets, and consolidating. Now, if you're acquiring assets and you take the whole 20 years to do it, you're going to have some assets that have crushed it, have low debt to asset price ratio. But then if you're going to have some assets you purchased in year 16 of a 20-year plan, it's not going to do anything for you because you've got 4 years and you've still got debt on that asset.
Correct.
How are you going to clear that? And so the power is that consolidation and selling is important. But if you can tighten in a 20-year plan, all your buying is across 5 to 7 years, then you're in a position where you can go, well, my buying's across 5 to 7 years. I've now got 13 to 20 years of some assets where they hold for a long time. Now I can see my chess pieces and decide what I want to sell. And if you're ordering what you want to sell, my thinking has always been this: a downsize of the family home is the most X factor sale that can help anyone with retirement. Because the key thing is when you downsize it, it's CGT free. As of today's rules. Let's hope the government doesn't come for that. Knowing them, they will, right? The second thing is that it's not replacing or losing an income asset. You're replacing a non-income producing with a non-income producing. And then the third part is that you're releasing. And then the third part is that post tax-free money is now able to go through and clear debts on assets that you have income streams from. A simple example back of the napkin is if you have a $2 million home, it goes to $4 to $6 million in that 20-year time period. You've got $2 million of investment debt that you kept on interest only for as long as possible. And then what happened was you sold that downsized home at $4 to $6 million, cleared the debt, and then bought a much cheaper unit. And you're able to live in that unit in your older years, knowing you've got your 4 investments debt free. And that's not even including your super now. So
and you've got cash.
Exactly.
And you've got cash to buy a high yielding asset.
That's it, right? So that's one scenario where sell works. Another scenario of where the sale works is that you're selling large value assets to clear the highest income producing assets. So when we acquire, we often find the residential growth rates of assets have outperformed many commercials.
Yeah.
And then if we get to that time where we've got resi and commercial in a portfolio, and maybe you don't have the downsize of the family home as part of your goal, you might sell some of your highest value, lowest yielding assets in that 15 to 20 year period from now.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And you'll, yes, have to pay tax on them, but you'll clear commercial debts. And so your highest yielding assets are now debt free, producing the stream you want with less.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Love that. So specifically around your portfolio, do you have a mix of resi and commercial at the moment? Which point did you decide that we need to start going into commercial?
Yeah, so I think it's, I call this around building an asset base. And I have resi and commercial. But the asset base is this. I want to hit a target number. For some people, that might be 5 million. Some people might be 10 million. And the idea is once you carve out that target number, you basically go from there and say, well, imagine I didn't buy any more growth assets and just these assets were all I had. What would they compound to by the time I get to the silver hair or whatever you want to call it, right? The gray hairs.
So this is the decades you're talking about.
That's right. And this is my residential asset base. Now that I know that number, and I imagine it at 10, 20, 30 years, and I feel good about that, what's one more residential going to do for you? 2 more? Probably not a lot. And so at that point, you might want to go, well, I'm ready for income-based decisions. Because if I have my 5 become 10, 10 become 20 mil through compounding over time, well, I want that 20 mil in growth to be the stuff I sell maybe to clear my debts on the commercial. So an extra residential asset, if you do the math, it's not the best income generator, even in long term. You'll look at it and you go, 4, 5, 6 residentials, there's not this huge jump in income, but all it takes is one debt-free commercial and it can be a big wave of income.
Yeah.
So once you've hit your growth number at a base of 5 or 2 or 10 mil, then you want to transition. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in an extra kitchen, an extra roof, an extra bathroom to think about, all for an extra few $100s a week, which isn't ideal.
Imagine all those loan docs.
Yeah, absolutely. So optimizing a portfolio, right?
Yeah.
That's key.
And then if somebody who's just starting to look at investing and they want to build that $5 million property portfolio, what's the first move they should be thinking about or doing?
So I'm a big believer of reverse engineering your success.
Me too.
Like, you know what I mean? You got to figure out what the end goal looks like. And great. I'm glad you resonate with that. So firstly, just kick off with what the end goal is.
Yeah.
Time, dollar value of asset base, income it produces, and then reverse engineer. And when you reverse engineer, your picture is going to be very pretty or it's going to be horrible, right? And horrible examples could be not enough cash, not enough borrowing capacity, not enough this. When you reverse engineer it though, you're at least going to know the sequence of moves that it takes. And then from there, you can start to the next phase, which is go, what are my gaps?
Yeah.
Well, my gaps are by property 3, I won't have the deposit. Or by property 3, I won't have the income. Well, you got a few things here now. Now you figured out your gaps, you got to plug them in. Easier said than done. So for some gaps, you plug them in by having the right team around you. Yeah. So from you on the finance side, you'll be able to come in and say, these banks are better. Those banks are better. Let me get you there based on this. Now you've maximized that. The accounting side might be these structures with your finance professional might get you there, whether it be trust, companies, personal. Then the third part, which is I believe should be the primary, is what are you going to do about it? You know, your income, your savings. Are you at it alone? Or you're lucky like me and you have your, partner for your life set at age 22 and you're definitely, jumping from there to be on the journey together on property, because our first property was at 22 and it was together. Yeah. Very few people get clarity that early on in life where they feel like they've got their one forever. Yeah. It's 22. You're both committed to the journey. You're both clear on it.
And then you've got each other to lean on.
Exactly, right? Yeah. Double income, no kids. The dinks, they call it at the time. So that was there. But the main thing was having the gaps that you plug in, reverse engineering, and then looking at the team you build around you from finance, accounting, and property. All of those things will help. And just realize sometimes the picture will be pretty. Sometimes you can make it pretty by extending the time frame. Yeah. Or sometimes it's not good and you just got to realize this is what you can get to and you got to fill in the rest.
Yeah. I love that. So the 3 things were, reverse engineer, figure out your gaps, plug the gaps. Yeah. And sometimes you got to do some work.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a whole bunch of sometimes. It's definitely more than sometimes, but I'm with you. That's it.
Next question. This one I get quite often. For someone with a limited budget, what's your advice for them to get into property investing?
So I think right now it's fair to say that the majority will be limited budgets. Interest rates are not pretty. The economy is not strengthening by any means. And at the same time right now, the cost of repayments due to those interest rates, it makes people feel a bit deflated on what they can get. And so I think the key here is that my first few purchases outside of the home to live in initially were also affordable investments. So it's better to start somewhere than not be in the game at all, right? So the first thing is it usually requires a bit of challenging your comforts. The most affordable investments are not in the city of Sydney. Do you know what I mean? City of Sydney is a great financial market, great for family homes, a big city with lots of prosperity. But the moment you start looking at investment, the numbers don't make sense here because it's hard to hold. And at the same time, you look at prices, they create a false expectation of how far your money goes. To give you some context, I was at an event speaking to ladies last night. And it was a ladies, a club event where there was around helping women grow their wealth. And I found some really unique questions come up. This was a Bondi Beach event. So as you can imagine,
decent suburbs, yeah.
Decent suburbs. But this is the problem. A lady came up to me at the end of the night and she came to me and said, hey, we've only got 120K in savings. We're not really sure on what to do. How do we get into property? This is interesting, right?
And then you're like, I can split that to two investments at least.
So the key here is there's a perception that is based on the reality around you.
Yes.
So if you're going to live in Bondi, if you're going to be in Sydney, you might say 120K is nothing. And for many people, that might be the case. But then if you start to be conditioned around what the whole country offers, you'll realize that the highest growing markets that grew over 20% over the last 12 months, whilst the national market did only 8.4, that's almost 3 times the national average. They were markets priced between 4 and 600K, which that 100K would have fulfilled your professional fees, the deposit, the mortgage insurance, anything like that. And so I think the key here is perspective setting is big. And yes, you should use those affordable budgets to get in.
So realizing that you don't have to invest where you live. And definitely not in Sydney.
Absolutely. And like get rid of the misconceptions. Like example, major city, smaller city. Like that has no correlation to capital growth. Distance to your home.
Yeah.
Even those who own a property in the same suburb they live in hardly visit it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you go by and knock on the tenant's door each day. Hey, just checking if everything's okay. This isn't one of those spoof videos, the Airbnbs.
Yeah.
Someone's watching, like they're in Airbnb watching TV and then a bookshelf opens and the landlord comes out of the garage. He's like, oh, you guys are still here? I've seen so many videos like that. Is it cool if I go and get my laundry from there? They're like, what the hell? We booked this place. Come on, you're not like that. You're not going to do that. Let it go, the emotional connection, and realize that you're creating wealth. You're housing tenants. You're creating an opportunity for many people there, including family, generationally. Make the best decision. Don't make the most comfortable one.
And I think it's like what you said, it's perspective, right? Realizing that your small budget might be good enough to invest in another region, another area within Australia. And there are opportunities out there, but you just need to know where to find them.
Absolutely. I mean, on the national stage, we are able to do something called market pressure analysis, which reviews 30 indicators around what we think the forecast for the next 12 months will be. And with that market pressure analysis, every single year, there's been some that we ranked as dark green, very high growth next 12 months, light green, medium growth over the next 12 months, yellow, balanced, and then the dark brown, declining. And so the key thing here is that there are buyer's markets where you can negotiate well, and there's super hot short-term growth markets where you can get growth in. Exists across the whole country in different budgets. So it's definitely something possible.
And that goes to your first point at the beginning of the podcast was data.
Absolutely.
Why you need data.
Absolutely. I mean, like we're in a world now where it's full of information, but it's not about information because it's everywhere. It's now about who interprets it the best.
Yes, I like that. So for a first home buyer in Sydney, this is probably going back to, rolls off to what your last example was. For a first home buyer in Sydney now, who's weighing up to buy their first home and taking advantage of their grants or forfeiting their grants to buy an investment, what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, this is a tough one because the grants are killer. Like sometimes you get stamp duty free, you get the whole CGT exemption if you're living inside it for some time. You'll also get more competitive interest rates from the bank.
No LMI.
Higher leverage, no LMI. Like it stacks up.
Yeah.
I've got like views on this that are a bit different to most. Traditionally, everyone will just go for that.
Yeah.
But then the downside is the price caps in Australia by the government are horrible. Those price caps are designed for everyone to live in a shoebox or everyone to have the smallest property, the most out there area or the worst asset type units. And so by doing this, what ends up happening is that people think they're getting a decision that saves them money. And yes, their capital goes a lot further, but a long-term decision of pain in the price points. And so what I would say is this. Firstly, review the state you're in. What can you get? Second is review the market pressure of your state. Are you going to get in the data and it's strong? Because if, say, someone's living in regional Queensland that you're going to use a first-home buyer benefit, you should be licking your lips. This is going to be, you're going to kill it. You're going to have the least money in.
Yeah.
The markets are growing crazy. They're affordable to get into. And at the same time, you're in a perspective where you're able to save on tax, save on interest rates, have lower deposit required. You're not losing in any situation. But if you're in another part and that's not the right market, you could be holding yourself back years. So that's the first part, market pressure. The second part is if the market pressure is good or bad, you need to look at all the possible decisions you could have made if you didn't have a home to live in. Meaning if you went down the investment path and forgoed the grants, forgoed the benefits.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. If the metrics aren't right on the second path, this is where it gets interesting. For example, even if the growth of the location you're in is likely to be half that of the other growth, if your cash is just not enough to even touch that other city that's going to grow better, you might be better taking half the growth initially because you have much less cash and you can get into it. But then you have to make a conscious decision. As soon as the equity is there, as soon as your savings is there, you're off to the next. Because I've seen some people get in with under 50K into some markets in New South Wales. And I'm like, this is nuts, right?
Yeah.
Because of the first home, no stamp duty, 95 to 98% loans, intense. They got in. Even if the growth rates were 2 to 5% versus another location being 10%, they might not have been ready for that 10% location for another 4 years because of savings needed, their savings rate. So there are some cases where it makes sense and I advocate for that. But if you do this formula review of where your cash position is, can you alter other options? What's the other options in the country versus yours? Secondly, if you review the actual market pressure, you can then make a well-informed decision. I'm going to buy that place in my backyard and get the first home stuff, or I'm going to forego that and buy an investment. And you don't need that to be successful, but it's just decision making.
Yeah, okay. So you're really weighing up growth, really.
Yeah, weighing up the growth and how much cash you have, because you may not have enough for that investment.
Yeah.
And you might need to do this. At least you get in the market.
To take that first step to go to the next step.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's good advice. When you're starting with your first property, how do you decide whether to focus on capital growth or cash flow? Or is there a balance that somebody should really look at?
So the whole capital growth and cash flow thing is a bit of a myth, right?
Yeah.
It's been created because people use extremes.
Yeah.
If you use the lowest yielding market in the country and it's a high priced market that's done really, really well in dollar values or in the long term that it's been there, then you compare it to something yielding at 10% plus in the most remote mining town, in the most affordable location. Of course, there's going to be a massive variance in performance. Massive. But the problem is most people build these examples by using extremes rather than using reality. We have a curve where we took yield and price growth on the lowest end and took it into yield buckets. 1 to 2% yields, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, and so forth. At the extremes, 100% variance between growth and cash flow.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start going to more middles, there's not a variance.
Right.
Those middle markets have grown just as much as the low yield markets.
Right.
And here's the last part. Many people will forget that low yield markets weren't always low yield markets.
Yeah, that's right.
To grow, the yield got pushed down.
Yeah.
And so this is a common mistake people make. And I'll give you a Sydney example. In Sydney, there's the suburb of Glenwood, which I used to live in about 30 kilometers away from City. Glenwood, northwest Sydney. So Bella Vista, Glenwood, those areas. Yeah. And Glenwood in about 2008 had house prices in the 400s.
Yep.
Rental yields were also between 4 and 5%. So firstly, 4 to 5% yields in Sydney. Boom. That's epic, right? Yeah. Now, what happens is instead of someone seeing any potential in Glenwood back then, they downplayed it. They wanted the markets closer in, growth, yield, all those conversations, growth, cash flow. And what they didn't do is this. They didn't get in 2008 when the yields were better. They waited for Glenwood to grow 120 to 130% over 10 years.
Yeah.
The yields now are a horrible 2 to 3%. And then someone goes, look at that. Low yield markets equal growth. No, Dumbo. The market was high yielding initially.
Yeah.
Yield became suppressed.
because of demand.
Exactly. The growth outpaced rental growth and yields became low. So your job isn't to look at a low yielding market and go buy there because growth is good. That's already happened. Your job is to look at where are yields good that are likely to suppress because price growth is going to be better than rental growth.
So you're looking for trend.
That's it. And so in that case, someone could have enjoyed 130% growth in the 10 years to follow, and they could have enjoyed the high yields being at 4 to 5% rather than getting somewhere at 2 to 3% that grew the same.
So what do I get out of that? So there's extremes on both markets.
Correct.
You're not going to win on either side.
Yeah.
The middle of the market is probably where the potential is. And if you're looking at high value properties with low yields, they were once upon a time in that mid-market section.
Yeah, and if not like maybe some have always traditionally been low, but they were higher before today because they became more expensive as a result of price outpacing rents. And until the recent rental boom, prices have massively outpaced rents in most parts of the country. In the recent rental boom, it's catching up. And I know this sounds crazy. People are thinking, wow, the rents have gone out of control. But people forget when the times are good. And what I mean by that is they forget that rents had not grown a lot across Australia from 2010 to 2021. And so if you look at 11 years of poor rental growth, as sad as this sounds, the truth is it just played catch up. It's not a crazy boom and rents are crazily going all over the place and it's a crisis. It's a crisis in terms of the availability of rental, but it's not a crisis in terms of the long-term growth that's happened. Yeah. We've just had the short-term growth like blind people because they've seen it in a condensed period.
Yeah.
It actually had no growth. I mean, was everyone making articles or making great promotional things to go rental paradise? Thank God the investors are here and there's a rental paradise from 2010 to 2020. There's low rents, cheap rents, it's affordable everywhere. No one campaigned that.
No.
Right? Only when shit goes wrong the other way, when people come in and go, this is horrible, this is bad. Now, I agree, it's bad.
It's uncomfortable and everybody
absolutely
doesn't like it.
I agree it's bad because of the availability problem, but the actual percentage growth is much the same as long-term averages. It just caught up. That's it.
Yeah, I agree. I have my property in Penrith and that rent has not gone up until like the last 2 years.
Yeah, you would have had a long time of sitting there with little to low growth and rent, but no one ever celebrates the 10 years of little to low growth and rent because they feel like that's just what it should be.
Yeah,
and then when it happens, everyone hates it.
Yeah. Can you walk us through how to select your very first investment property? As in, what are the most critical factors to consider? Things like, if people just do a search online, people kind of float the idea of crime rates, employment rates, income, median house price versus affordability. So for an investor who's kind of looking at getting into the market, what type of metrics are we really looking at?
Okay, cool. Yep. So we're talking metrics now. So I'm going to assume they've reverse engineered their goals. They've got a budget that they're happy to work with.
Yep.
And I'm also going to assume that they've got approval and they're comfortable to get going. Now, when you do that, the next step should be, do you want to target buyers markets or do you want to target growth markets? One would think that in short-term growth, the growth markets would help you as a first-time investor. But there's some people who prefer buying really well on the way in, having high rental yields, low competition, good properties they feel comfortable with, and buy well, and they'll have the patience to come around, and then they'll get into growth markets afterwards. So that's an internal decision to make. Now, in making the decision, you want to understand market pressure.
What's the difference between a buyer's market and a growth market?
Yeah, so I'll use market pressure to explain the differences. So in Australian history, there's never been a time where these 5 indicators I share with you are going to look like they do, and they've actually grown in value. If a house market or if a market shows these 5 indicators, it will not grow until the 5 indicators change. So firstly, days on market being really high. Second, vendor discounting being really high. Vacancy rates being very high. Lots of listings available for sale in comparison to long-term averages. And then also having very low transactions happening and low sales volumes. So these are what we call snapshot, meaning that's what it is. Then there's also trending. Days on market going up. Vendor discounting going up, rental vacancy going up, listings going up, sales volumes coming down. There's never been a time in Australian history where all of these 5 were happening in that poor result and a market boomed. If these change, markets boom. And now to turn away from indicator and talk to it as if it's a barbecue conversation, that's the best way to explain this. Hey, there's a property selling quickly right now, and they're selling much faster than last year. There's a lot less discounts happening, and it's hardly happening in terms of the trend. It's like people are selling it for more than listing. Hardly any properties for sale, and it's less properties for sale than the last 1 year, 3 year, and 5 years. Hardly any properties for rent, and it's lower than last year and the years before. And as a result, rents are rising. And at the same time, there's lots of people buying. The transactions are jumping up. I'm losing out to many people, and it's snapping up quickly, and lots of people are buying. So if someone explains that to you in a barbecue chat and you don't know anything about property data, what do you think the market's going to do?
The first thing I'll be like, what's this location?
Yeah. It's
Like
going
lean
up. Exactly. So the key learning here is that there's never been a time in Australian history where that happens and the market's not growing as we speak.
Yeah.
And there's never been a time in Australian history where the opposite happens and the market's booming at that time.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, like, you can't have demand outpace supply in that environment. You know, you can't have supply be much lower than demand in that environment. And you can't have prices go if all the things are negative there. And so from that perspective, your job should be now categorizing what buyers or sellers market you want based on what that picture looks like, and then reinforcing that market pressure with macro, micro, and on the ground. So macro is now going, that's what's happening in, say, Brisbane. Why? How come? Core drivers, jobs, infrastructure, employment, migration, all the macro factors, finance availability. You're going very macro. Like, what do you feel are the reasons? Lifestyle. Demographic shifts. These are what we call macro. Micro is the indicators. Turn 5 into 30. Add on building approvals. Add on growth by quartiles. And the list goes on. And then on the ground is going due diligence. Is this in front of a main road or on a main road? Is this right next to a cemetery? Is this having a bus stop right in front of the house?
Houses.
Housing commission at high ratio percentages. If you can then rule out that, you've got yourself a winning formula. That's what we do day in, day out. Macro, micro, on the ground, market pressure, hot, cold, buyer's market, seller's markets, reverse engineer a plan, and actually get the first one right. That's key.
Did you get that, guys? If you don't know what you're doing, go to InvestorKit.
We're here, yeah.
When someone's aiming to build a portfolio, how important is the strategy? And where I'm going with this is when somebody's looking at maybe a growth area compared to a value add property. And value add just means, like a reno.
Firstly, you've got to make sure from the value add piece, you're actually up for it. People want something, but they ain't ready for it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's like there's a basketball term for any basketballers watching this. And I'm going to do my best American accent when I say it. It's like, he don't want it. He don't want it. Like, what that means is if someone's got the basketball and they're down at the paint and they're going to try and score, they think they want to score, they want to win the game, but they don't really want it. Like, they don't really want to do it. They don't want to go up against that defense. They don't want to go up against that matchup. Yeah. They're not showing the aggression. They're not ready for it.
Yeah.
So how do I bring that basketball term back to property? Is you may want the value adds, but then I'll share with you a few things. That property's never been renovated and or developed before. And the house condition got worse every single year because the previous seller felt, why should I improve it if it's got that potential? And they didn't want to do that because of the development. Secondly, the land size might be larger because of that development opportunity. But as a result, the rental yield's very low because the price might be in the land, but the rent's not in the land. The third thing is, because it hasn't been maintained, you've got death by 1,000 cuts until you choose the day to develop it. Meaning you're going to keep having renos and maintenance and quality issues and things like that. The next thing is other people may want it for its potential, and people pay a price for its potential, not what it's worth today. And so now you're hoping that potential comes to fruition. Then if you're not ready for that negative cash flow to be that, large, you now will be held off borrowing for other properties because your money sunk into this. And if the growth doesn't happen well in the market you've selected, even if you've got that strategy as the development potential, then you might be wearing costs, low growth, and you have to wait until you can actually develop it to make that money. And then on top of that, you might have development potential, but everything is STCA, subject to council approval. Yeah. And so you might think the potential's there, but then you go down the town planner, you go down to the discussions with the surveyors, and the surveyor down there is going, hey, you need extra piers because the soil's a bit weak.
Hydraulics.
You need extra support there. The town planner goes, hey, we need to look at these rules and elevation requirements because of overlays or other things like that. And then what you thought you could design 4 on there, you can now design 2. Shit goes wrong. And so do you want that? I mean, yes, there's the other side. People talk about the glory stuff. But remember, if it was that easy and that done well and the result was that good for everyone, the richest people who do it would never have a sad story. But even the wealthiest, I'm talking the best developers in this country who've done it in billions of dollars with the greatest teams behind them, with a company built just to focus on that, lose money on some deals, don't make as much on others, make mistakes, own up to those mistakes, hire fire people for those mistakes who are professionals in the space, and you're thinking there that this is going to be your value add strategy you've always wanted to do. And so if you're up for it, and if you do want it, the basketball term, right, then go for it. I'm going to tell you myself, I've built a 17 million portfolio with my wife, and not one property has development potential. Not one.
Wow. Okay.
So the key here is you don't have to have it. I'm a little bit more risk adverse. There's so much I don't know, and I don't want to pretend I know.
Yeah.
And if you're usually buying across the nation, even the best developers don't know every council, don't know every contact, don't know every person. So usually I find those developers stay location specific. They become like business people, and it's not now about property investing. It's the business of property. And in the business of property, they focus on where their relationships, their contacts, everything is, and then nail it because they become having more practice to get perfect. You can't afford practice to have that one location in a random town that you feel like that would be good for data and development. And also people realize the hype at the potential, but then what it ends up being when they've actually done the things don't end up being the same as the potential. So if you're up for it, do it. If you don't want it, don't do it.
What's your opinions on like renos, like just quick fix?
Yeah, look, same thing there, but to a less like extreme extent, right? You can have the renos have some upside, totally, right? I've had renos. I had a property in Brisbane that I purchased for $292,000 back in 2016-17. I think that particular property is worth well into the sixes now. And when it was worth in the fives, I'd done a 28K reno and I'd uplifted it like 4 times on that money. So that 28K gave me 100K back. So you can have some pretty great examples like that. But the same thing, until the time had come to renovate it, I didn't have the best tenant in there because I was charging a lower rent, and in that area, it didn't come out as well. I had lots of maintenance happen in there. I had lots of issues happen in there. So I had to handle that before the time came where I was ready to renovate and do it. Every renovation didn't come out perfect, right? I got a great price on what I did, but it took me many like quotes and attempts to get to it. So you got to be up for the work.
The
and if
project
you're up for
management,
it can come through.
Yeah, right. I like that. If you're, do you want it?
Do you want it? Like, he don't want it. Like it's the basketball. Like I just imagine like moments where I've caught the ball and like I'm meant to score on my guy in front of me, and then the defense just like kills your confidence and goes, he don't want it. And then like you're like questioning yourself. I'm like, should I pass the ball or should I not?
Like, do I actually want it?
Yeah, do I actually want it? I'm looking at the defender. I'm like, this guy will lock me up. I don't want it. And so I just pass it back. I'm like, yeah, I don't want it, right? But then one moments where we look at it and you go, someone tries to shout to you, it's like, he don't want it. And you're looking at it, and the old basketball term is to, if someone's much smaller than you and you think you can beat them in that one-on-one matchup, you shout out mouse in the house, right? So like the whole idea is mouse in the house. It means you got him covered. I'm gonna beat him. So
standover tactics.
Yeah. It's a brutal game when you know the chats and know the dialogue. So trash talk.
When you're buying your first property and somebody who's wanted to build their portfolio, how does somebody know it's time for them to buy that second one? Or if they're buying the third one, buying the fourth one?
Okay. So firstly, I like to operate with a plan in mind. And some plans that we build for people, you cannot buy every year consecutively. Might be year 1, year 3, year 7. And so the first thing is buy to the plan and be okay to take a chill break. Like that's fine to not buy for the next one, but review annually. So if you have a 3 property over 7-year goal, but you review annually, you're going to be able to see if the year 3 can become year 2, if the year 7 can become year 4. Now, I have a few rules that I promise you'll be super helpful. Number 1 is have a buffer of at least 20K to 25K per property. Number 2 is can you borrow for the next? Number 3 is does your monthly savings rate allow for the shortfall in cash flow to handle the next? If you can do these 3 things, you're able to service, you're able to hold the repayments, and you have the buffer. The 4th thing was what I highlighted earlier. Do you have a plan that says you must buy it? So if that plan says you should, or you've got more to buy, then go for it. These are 4 key parts that you can do to go, it's in my plan, I have the buffer, I can manage it cash flow wise, I can borrow for it. What are you doing? Go get it, right?
Yeah, I love that. So buffer, cash flow.
Buffer, cash flow, borrowing capacity, and then your plan. Because if you have and there's a mistake that people make. If you have 4 properties in your plan and you've now finished your acquisition period and you go to get the 5th now, you've taken equity, increased debt.
Yeah.
Got new debt. It's not a good thing. Because do you know what I mean? Like if your plan is to get something else, yes, you might go, I can just sell that later on. True. But your cash flows changed now for your journey and you wanted to pummel those other loans down faster.
Yeah.
Like it might be in your advantage to not buy.
Yeah.
Also, you might have built a certain lifestyle if you had the 4 and stopped because now you got more money for yourself.
Yeah.
Remember, life's short.
Yeah.
You've got to enjoy it as you build wealth too.
Yeah, I
right?
love that.
If you want to build a property portfolio and you go, you only need 4 properties and you're content with where that takes you, getting your 5th and 6th is only going to crunch your lifestyle.
It's not going to make a material difference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And look, it might make a financial difference in 10 years or 20 years when you sell those properties. And you're like, see, I sold them. I'm better off now. But I asked myself, over those 16 years that you were waiting to get to that 20-year journey, and you could have sat there and not purchased anymore, could have had more cash for your family, more cash for holidays, more cash for lifestyle. You sunk it in that 5th one to change your passive income from 100K to 120. Now that extra 20 for the rest of your life when you're an older person versus the 15 years of having more money, more cash flow, more peace of mind, more safety. What was more important to you?
Yeah. So what are you trading it up for?
You got to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm looking at property differently for me. Property is not a cash flow vehicle for me anymore. It's a wealth storage. It's a leveraged area that I can have equity to lean on if needed. And it's a vehicle that gives me confidence my future generations are set. My business is my cash flow vehicle. My business is at a stage where I've got about 40 team members. And as a result, the team is able to leverage, meaning we work together so they can be the leverage to take the results of the business, our clients themselves to new heights.
Yep.
That's the leverage. I'm not doing every single deal and every single purchase and every single result for every single client. I'm involved everywhere,
Yep.
which is great, but I'm not doing every single one.
Yep.
So that is the cash flow vehicle for me long term. The main vehicle for wealth storage is property. So now that I know that, my plan isn't to stop and stay there. My plan is to grow that wealth and then find a balance between debt and value and make sure that's healthy. But for others, if that's your income vehicle and you want to transition from job to passive income, you've got to look at it and going, is that 5th or 6th or 7th worth it if I'm going to not enjoy the 15 years to get to that point? So key things to look at.
I think, yeah, is a really good point. I don't think many people actually hear that. Like, you know, is that 5th property actually going to make a difference to you?
Yeah.
And how's it going to impact your lifestyle if it's not part of your plan?
Yeah, and they're probably looking at it like, dude, like, Arj, why are you saying that? You want me to buy more? Or shouldn't you want me to buy more?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think if you speak to many property professionals, that's the goal. Why aren't you buying your 5th? Why aren't you buying your 6th? Like, come on, man. Like, each to their own.
Yeah.
Right? Each to their own. So for me, it's like, I'm not going to say you should buy one if your plan doesn't need it.
Yeah.
Like, why make your $3,000 a month savings rate come down to $1,500, come down to $1,000? Husband or wife loses a job and you're fucked.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or I'll say another version of that, you're stuffed.
Yeah.
So like the key here is that I want people to realize you need to have a balance.
Yeah.
And that balance can exist in, no, my balance is off and I'm going to go hard and that's important to me. Or the balance can be, I want that extra cash flow savings. I want the risk management principles. I want everything there and I'm going to be content with those properties. And also, property's not your only vehicle. Do you know what I mean? You have your super and you might not want to invest in property in there. You'll have your own income streams and that might transition to part-time jobs in the future because you can't sit still and you don't want to not work. So like there's so many aspects to life. You've got to be more holistic about it.
I actually love that.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Okay, so wrapping up, can you give us some insights of what you believe 2025 would look like, as in the markets to watch out for?
Absolutely. So first thing is the divergence has kicked off in 2024. And what I mean by that is we're away from the national boom and it's some being poor results, some being okay, some booming. So I like that because it's easier to see what the country is going to in different areas as a result. So that part will continue. 2025 will see some markets continue to slow down, continue to flatten, and some others rise. That's the first part. The second part is we're currently going through a performance period with a lower quartile is the better performer. Lower quartile in simple terms means the cheaper prices across the nation.
I love cheaper prices.
Yeah. Those markets in the lower end are performing better than the higher end, and they've done so for the last 2 years. Whilst we're in interest rates being this high, it's likely that continues. But as 2025 and 2026 comes around, interest rates are going to be much lower than they are today. This is as a result of the crippling data points that we're seeing in the economy, right? Job advertisements are no longer rising. They're at the peak and they're flattened and come off from many locations.
Yep.
GDP is as low as it could be right now. The third part is spending data is coming off a cliff. Household savings ratio is the weakest it's been for many, many years.
Yep.
Essentially, the interest rates are just too high at the moment. And whilst they're not causing mass delinquency rates, they're creeping up, but no mass delinquency rates. Like Aussie households are great, structurally sound, but you can't stay here forever and not expect pain. So I would say interest rates will come down pretty quickly over 25 and 26.
Yep.
And they'll start to create two changes. Higher priced markets will start to open up more because people can naturally borrow more. People can also see their repayments and see that it's not a killer. And then the final part is upsizers will start cashing in. because when the lower quartile of markets and cheaper priced properties kill it and the gap between them and middle and higher price markets is low, then that gap that's lower gives more people to move to better locations or move to bigger homes. And so when you see that, you'll just start to see the lower price markets start to normalize in some cities, not all. And then you'll start to see the middle and upper markets get more activity. For example, just say use Perth as an example, the lower price market have close to doubled the performance in some areas than the higher price. That can't stay forever.
Yeah.
So 25 and 26, you'll start to see these trends come into play, and interest rates will start being a creator of some of those trends.
So if I was to digest this, so lower markets you're thinking is going to start to maybe more...
It'll not kill it as much as it has as interest rate declines intensify, but they are going to kill it until then.
And final and last question, any last messages you want to leave the audience?
Yeah, awesome. Look, firstly, it's been amazing being here. Thank you for having me. I've shared a few things across, looking at personally your life, looking at re-engineering and reverse engineering, and then lastly, explaining the concepts of market pressure. So my biggest tip is that whilst this has been an in-depth interview and there'll be lots to take out, the 3 things people should focus on is what you can control, your goals, your actual income, your mindset, and things like that. Secondly is the team that you build around you to help you reverse engineer, because they'll give you the reality check. And then third is if you nail market pressure, you're going to be in a better position to know what's hot, what's not hot, and choose what's important to you.
Yeah.
All the other parts will support that, like buffer management, all these risk management. They're all supportive tools, but those are the 3 cores.
I think my takeaway from this interview is growing a portfolio is great, but it does require quite a few things, and it also requires your personal commitment, your personal rate of growth, as in income growth as well, to build large portfolios, and then also choosing good locations, growth locations that are data backed. And I think with that, that's a winning formula.
Thank you, my friend. Really appreciate it. And I agree.
Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.
Thank you.